This week, the Madlanga Commission marked its 100th day of testimony, and they did things with a twist because for the first time, we saw the inquiry listen through testimony from witness G to be particular without the Commissioner's evidence leaders and its staff in the room. I'll tell you why in a moment. Plus, most of the days this week proved to be an educational journey as we learned more about drug busts and how these are undertaken. This commission is teaching us so much about what truly happens behind those headlines, in particular when they talk about multi-million rand seizures in our country's ports of entry. I'm Ziyanda, Ngcobo, and as usual, I have all the highlights of the week that was at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry. On Monday marked exactly 100 days of testimony at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry. And as we've seen with this particular process, no one day is the same, as things are not handled according to the circumstances of the day. And I say this because proceedings got off to a unique note where for the first time, the auditorium remained empty. No commissioner, evidence leader or staff member was on site, including the witness who was also speaking from a remote location. Witness G, who's a crime intelligence officer and said to be one of the co-handlers of Northwest businessman Brown Mokhotsi, became apprehensive to read out certain paragraphs which would make it possible to identify them and compromise their safety.
Witness G, the idea was to have some of your evidence, and my understanding is that a substantial part of it by everybody, by the public. Now as it is, we are close to in fact we are beyond the halfway mark, and you do not agree to state publicly what's in your statement. This is getting problematic. Let me just just confer very quickly with my co-commissioners and see how to resolve this. But my inclination at this stage is that we should not get to a point where your entire statement is basically in camera. So everything is fully in camera.
But there were several other challenges that were experienced during Monday's proceedings. These included the internet connectivity and witness G at times being inaudible to the evidence leader.
So I think the Commission needs to make a ruling as to whether we go completely into camera hearings or whether, because most of my questioning at a later stage is going to deal, if these are issues that we cannot mention publicly, then most of my questioning is going to touch on issues that we cannot mention publicly.
Mr. Matsala, do you want to say anything on this?
I think it may be worthwhile to perhaps establish how some of these names could reveal his identity. So I think perhaps, and I know that the adjournments are very tiring, but I think it might be an exercise we need to do, so that we have a list of things of people that should not be mentioned.
So the Madlanga Commission ultimately decided to recall its April ruling in relation to witness G's testimony, who's said to be the co-handler of Brown Mokhotsi, as I already said. Now, at the time, the Commission had decided that this particular witness would give evidence from a remote location, have their voice distorted, and only their audio would be able to be heard within the auditorium. Now, the Commission, I should say, ultimately decided that it would be impractical to continue in the fashion that it did on Monday due to those challenges that I mentioned, and so they decided to proceed fully in camera. Spokesperson Jeremy Michaels also explains the reason behind the commissioners themselves not being inside the auditorium.
It was a practical consideration. What we had intended was to switch between partly in camera, as in the witness verbalizing and the public being able to hear the testimony, and then going fully in camera and back and forth. So for that reason, it was impractical to have the proceedings here in the auditorium as we normally do.
And it's also unclear at this stage whether or not Witness G's transcripts will be made available to us in one way or another, given how this particular witness's testimony could either dismantle or actually uphold what Brown Mokgotsi has previously told the inquiry. You'll recall that Mokgotsi said that he had actually been infiltrating the network of Vusumuzi Cat Matlala as a part of his undercover agent duties. Now, this also included pretending to have a close relationship with the police minister on a special leave, that is Senzo Mchunu.
The Commission is committed to ensuring that the public has as much access to the testimony as possible. That is a call that will have to be made in due course. I can't say for sure at this point. We have been discussing that as well, and there have been lengthy discussions behind the scenes. That is why there's been this long delay about all those kind of considerations. And so certainly we are talking about that, but the final decision hasn't been made yet.
On Tuesday, it was then time for the Hawks head of serious organized crime, Hendrick Flynn, to take the witness stand to give evidence about corruption and criminality regarding drug busts. Flynn started off by outlining his role in the law enforcement agency. He basically told the inquiry that organized crime and corruption go hand in hand, and spoke about the processing and management of drugs by police once they've been seized at our country's ports of entry. Flynn then zoomed in on how a 200 million rand cocaine consignment that was confiscated at the Durban harbour in June 2021 went missing. The drugs had initially been taken to the Ispingo police station before being moved to a Hawks property in Port Shepstone, where they vanished 5 months later under mysterious circumstances. But the irregularities first began with how the crime scene was managed once the consignment had been intercepted in eThekwini.
You describe the crime scene in the way you describe it as the container itself. You would have closed up the container and the work inside. But the explanation that seems to have been given, that has been given here, suggests even outside of the container itself. So perhaps if you would just, for our understanding, give a description of what would be the perimeter of, in this kind of case. You're at the harbour, at a depot. There are other containers. There's this particular container. What is the perimeter of what you describe as a crime scene? And depending on the perimeter, is it open or at risk of people coming in and out if they are not part of the operation itself that has cordoned off the area?
Commissioners, obviously it will depend from scene to scene what's the layout. But initially the scene is confined to the container. That per se implicates that you have the scene under control. And you can decide where to set the perimeter. Because we must remember that that scene is now transferred from the container to the outside of the container, where the exhibits obviously will be opened. The LCRC personnel will conduct the necessary investigations. And you need to make it, prepare that area to such an extent that it will enable you to perform your duties to the required standard.
Flynn outlined that the management of the crime scene is directly linked to the probability of being able to solve the case. And this is because of the contamination of the crime zone could compromise tests done to ensure that fingerprints, DNA, and other evidence can be gathered. It was also interesting to hear the details, such as the kind of wrapping on the drugs can go a long way in helping to resolve such cases, and in particular discovering the owners of the consignment. In this instance, with the 541 kilograms of cocaine, the bricks were wrapped in black and yellow with TikTok and Jaguar logos on the packaging.
Typically what happens where there's a seizure, but there's no identified owners or recipients of that consignment. What happens? Is there an investigation, an inquiry, and in that process, what happens to the point where a decision is made to destroy those drugs?
Yeah, commissioners, in practice, those type of matters are dealt with predominantly under inquiries. The same processes needs to be followed. The exhibits must still find its way to FSL, where it's examined. You obtain your report from the experts. It's placed in the inquiry, obviously based on the merits, whether somebody or the consignment can be attributed to a person or entity. Then it will be converted into a case docket, and then the rest will follow. Otherwise, if there's no further leads, then the matter will be closed down and the notification be provided to the Forensic Science Laboratory for destruction.
So there was poor crime scene management insofar as how the drugs were stored. The cocaine was initially meant to have been taken to the Espingo police station for a short period, and this is what happened before it was questionably moved to the Hawks facility in Port Shepstone. Now, according to Flynn, this storage venue was not secure enough for the consignment due to it not having beam sensors, no CCTV cameras, and a faulty alarm system that was affected by consistent load shedding. All of this had previously been flagged by an official in October 2021, a month before the 200 million rands worth of drugs was stolen in November.
I referred earlier to the 2021 information note by General Musikidi regarding the theft of the cocaine at Port Shepstone. In this information note, the reference is made to an attempted break-in at the premises in early October 2021, a few weeks before the 2021 theft.
And even more curious is how the KZN Hawks head, Major General Lesetja Senona, became intricately involved in the management of the drugs and where they were stored. Now, the Hawks head in that province is said to have also had possession of the keys to the facility where the cocaine was being held.
And then you say General Senona took possession of the keys to the strong room after the exhibits were stored. Can you just explain that process? How does it work? The keys, where's the keys ordinarily kept?
Commissioners, it's in fact a very simple process, but the key holder, obviously when you take over a SAP 13 facility, you need to obviously conduct a proper audit of all the exhibits there. Under the circumstances here, all the other exhibits or articles were removed from the safe, but there needs to be a proper handing over of that facility then, obviously, as well as the key or keys to the SAP 13 or the vault.
And these keys are the keys to where the cocaine was going to be stored?
That's correct, Commissioners.
And routinely, who keeps that key? Is it, because General Sonona at that stage was the provincial head of DPCI. So this seems to me to be an operational matter, the keeping of the keys.
Commissioners, in practice, it is the SAP 13 custodian that will maintain the command and control over a SAP 13 facility. By no means the provincial head.
We'll continue with Flynn's testimony in a moment, because that statement, that official in October 2021 was from none other than the now SAP's Deputy National Commissioner, Tebelo Mosekedi, who was part of the Hawks at the time. And I'll also be in conversation with Aaron Hyman. He's a senior analyst of global initiatives against transnational organized crime. I'd like to ask him more about the modus operandi of drug syndicates in a moment. Good evening, Mr. Hyman. It's Ziyanda Ngcobo. Can you hear me?
Hi, Ziyanda. Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. We'll be with you in a moment. Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure. Who's my host?
Ziyanda, it's me.
Oh, is it you?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome back. You're still watching the weekly roundup of testimony at the Madlanga Commission with me, Ziyanda Ngcobo. So far, we've heard about the poor crime scene management at the Durban Harbour. Then it was the issue of inadequate management of the SAP 13 register, which manages the chain of custody. But Flynn also questioned why the drugs had to be moved all the way further down the south coast when there were at least 4 other police stations within 20 kilometers of Isipingo where the cocaine could have been taken. You recall that last October, it was Major General Lesetja Sonona who told the Commission that the Port Shepstone storage site was not only secure with the vault, but had also previously been used for consignments of this magnitude.
From those inquiries, you then looked at where those exhibits were stored after they were seized. These are the 4 police stations that you had picked up. It was Isipingo, it was Maiden Wharf, Brighton Beach, and Umbilo.
That's correct, Commissioners.
Okay. You can then continue with paragraph 55.
The distance between Isipingo Police Station and Maiden Wharf Police Station is 20 kilometers. Brighton Beach, between now Isipingo and Brighton Beach Police Station is 13 kilometers. And between Umbilo and between Isipingo and Umbilo is 17 kilometers. And then from Isipingo to Durban Central Police Station is 24 kilometers.
You may continue with 56.
I do not know why none of these facilities were considered as alternatives. Instead, the Port Shepstone DPCI Soke Unit premises 100 kilometers from Isipingo Police Station was considered appropriate.
Still on the issue of where the drugs were to be stored, Flynn testified that in seizures of this nature, the cocaine was meant to have immediately been taken to the Forensic Services Lab, FSL, in Silverton, Pretoria, for further testing. But on the day in question, on the 22nd of June 2021, at the Durban Harbour, it doesn't appear that FSL services were requested, but if they were, Flynn says the capacity to transfer the consignment should have not been a challenge at all.
This may indeed be what FSL communicated to the investigating officers when requests were made to FSL, but I wish to highlight the matter that casts doubt on the veracity of this version. On the 9th of July 2021, a few weeks after the 541 kilogram cocaine seizure, officials seized 700 kilograms of cocaine in Aeroton, Johannesburg. The Aeroton cocaine exhibits were transferred to FSL on 19 July 2021 for analysis and storage. If FSL had capacity on 19 July 2021 to store 700 kilograms, it is unclear why it did not have capacity for 541 kilograms 3 weeks earlier or at any time before the 2021 theft in Port Shepstone.
But does FSL have a dedicated space for drugs? I'm just thinking, what if they had in storage something else altogether?
Commissioner,
I'm just thinking maybe focus now is just on drugs. And you know, when last did you store drugs? You stored them on 19 July 2021. But that does not also answer the question, what else could have been stored during that period?
Commissioner, I do not have detailed knowledge about how forensic science are going about their business. But what I know for a fact is that there's different sections who has their own storing capabilities within that sections. So I would then consider it that the narcotics section would have its own dedicated storage facilities, because those analysts are dealing with narcotic cases only.
On Wednesday, and get this, it also emerged that after the consignment was questionably taken to the Ispinga police station for a brief period, the police then took it to the Port Shepstone SAPS, which was new information at the inquiry. And it remains unclear who would have signed out the drugs from the Port Shepstone SAPS station to move them to the Hawks facility in that same area. But even the site that was broken into, according to Flynn, is not allowed to keep an SAP 13 register, which records the chain of custody.
How do we know that 551 bags actually arrived at the DPCI offices in Port Shepstone if there's no document recording the arrival of those exhibits in the form described in 193 to say it was 541 1 kg bricks containing powder that looks like cocaine? So how do we know that these bricks ever made their way to the warehouse or the office in Port Shepstone if there's no document that records that?
That's indeed true, and it is a shortcoming, Commissioner, that you are identifying. But there are witness statements to that effect in the case docket, and I would prefer not to elaborate more on that specific aspect at this point, please.
All right, so as promised, we are going to take another deeper look at the illicit drug trafficking business in South Africa, but also on a trans-level national. And I'm now joined by Aaron Hyman. He's a senior analyst at the Global Initiative Against Transnational organized crime. A very good evening to you, Aaron, and thanks for joining us on Channel 405. I'm sure you got to hear a little bit of what Hendrick Flynn told the Commission of Inquiry. I mean, quite fascinating that an entire KZN Hawks head wanted to keep the keys to a strong room and in such a terribly protected storage site. But let's talk about drug syndicates and on this point of officials and how they conducted themselves, because are drug syndicates ever able to flourish or even exist without the assistance of those within law enforcement?
Good evening, Ziyanda, to you and to your audience. Well, South Africa and countries like South Africa have very strict legislation and regulation, and in theory have a robust law enforcement and intelligence environment aimed at investigating and prosecuting and disrupting organized crime syndicates. Within that environment, organized crime groups have to make use of professional enablers. And those are businessmen, lawyers, but unfortunately, they are also state officials and government officials. And as you rightly point out, they can't operate a flourishing trafficking or drug distribution business without those connections and without greasing, as it were, with large volumes of cash, illicit cash, this machine.
I mean, it's also quite fascinating that it's almost well known which ports of entry are a problem. Durban Harbour, the Lebombo border post, and the OR Tambo International Airport. They even know the modus operandi. And so what I'm trying to get to here is how do we then deal with the deliberate, it seems in this case, sabotaging of the chain of custody, right from the SAP 13 register all the way through to the storage site?
Well, trained SAPS officers will know how they have to secure the chain of custody. If they don't, then one would hope that there would be some sort of disciplinary inquiry or disciplinary procedure. And if it turns out that this person maybe derelicted their duty because they were paid, then one would hope that there would be a criminal investigation and serious repercussions for those individuals. I can't speak to the evidence that was led in this case, but it does seem that there is maybe fire where there is smoke.
And let's talk more, because I mean you deal a lot with transnational organized crime and the way in which firstly these drug labs, these super drug labs operate, but also the kinds of skills that are needed for such drug labs, and also the movement of these drugs from one country to the other. For instance, we heard, I was quite amused, that Mexicans are great cooks, but also even more critically, you know, one person isn't just used for one thing. They'll be the cook, they'll be assisting with the distribution, they'll also be dealing with trying to grease these officials. Just take us through the level of sophistication of, you know, the movement of the drugs and their distribution, not just only in South Africa, but the exchange in imports and exports.
Yeah, so South Africa, I think it's important just to understand what South Africa is to these global trafficking syndicates. We are a transit and logistics hub for the most part. Yes, we have strong markets, unfortunately, for drugs like heroin and methamphetamine, and we've got small markets for cocaine, but for the most part, cocaine, which seems to be the topic of the Madlanga Commission this past week, is for the most part just coming through South Africa. And as you've pointed out, and it's quite a worrying development, we are increasingly seeing the local presence of international groups like the notorious Mexican Sinaloa cartel, which seems to have teamed up with Nigerian organized crime groups in the country to set up their own methamphetamine production facilities, these super labs that you were mentioning, locally in South Africa, in places like Limpopo. You also have Bulgarian, Serbian, and Montenegrin organized crime groups, which are not only trafficking drugs through South Africa from South America, but also have an established presence here. And these groups are typically extremely well organized. They are very well financed. As you point out, they have very good skills at their disposal. They often outsource a lot of the work, especially the more sophisticated work, to skilled professionals. And some of them, like the Sinaloa cartel and the Nigerian confraternities, have very strict hierarchies with very specific roles for their different members. And they will divide their organizations up between the part of the organization that's responsible for drug trafficking on the one end or for human trafficking on the other end. And at the very top, you have these leadership figures who have access to the finances, and they're also the ones who have access to the corrupt officials and who have those relationships. And it's unfortunately why every now and again we see a politician standing next to an alleged drug trafficker.
Sure. I wonder how soon we'll be able to deal with dismantling these very sophisticated and, as you say, very organized criminal networks. That was Aaron Hyman. He is a senior analyst at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Thank you very much for your time this evening. All right, so in a moment, more testimony from Major General Flynn, plus critical evidence from the unit commander who was in charge of that Hawks building in Port Shepstone, which we now know should have never held those 200 million rands worth of drugs to begin with. Thanks for staying with Newzroom Africa here on Channel 405. Earlier, we reflected on the in-camera application that evidence leader Mahlapesilo SC put on behalf of a witness that was meant to appear on Friday. It turns out that this was none other than suspended KZN Hawks head Lesetja Sunona, whose testimony has now been moved to the 1st of June. Silo appeared briefly in between Flynn's testimony on Wednesday.
One of the issues he raised he raises is that since his suspension, he doesn't have sufficient access to his, I guess, computers and records held at the office. And he would require more time to attend to that. And I think perhaps that alone may be a sufficient ground to grant him the extension. He raises other issues in his request for a postponement, and he references his ongoing labor matter with the SAPS. And I think he says he's scheduled for an appearance on the 7th of May. So I would suggest that on the basis of those two reasons, there are other reasons advanced, of course, but I think those two reasons would be sufficient to argue for a postponement, Chair.
Thank you.
And if I may say, I would believe that if he's postponed to the 1st of June 2026, that would be shy of 4 weeks, and that is a fair postponement.
The hearing of General Sinona's evidence is postponed to 1 June 2026 at 9:30 a.m.
Most appreciated, and we shall communicate with him formally and so inform him, Chair.
Yeah. And perhaps it's best to issue a subpoena, saying that, or extend the same one. You'll look into the practicalities.
Yes.
After that, then it was time for Flynn's testimony to continue. The commissioners were still baffled by the decision not to take the drugs to the forensic lab for further testing.
It doesn't seem like there was ever an intention that these drugs will go to storage in Pretoria or that they would be tested so that we can be 100% sure that it was cocaine, 541 kilograms of it. Because I cannot understand how there is no paperwork saying to FSL, at some point when you do have capacity, we would like you to take these drugs. We would like for them to be tested so that we can ascertain that this was indeed cocaine. And if there's a need for people to be arrested and prosecuted, that can be done. What is your comment on my observation? I'm not stating facts, I'm just stating an observation.
Commissioner Khumalo, you are 100% correct. I also referred to that yesterday in the same manner as you have summarized it now, that it's my strong view that there was never an intention to submit it to FSL. And that's why I'm reflecting now on all the other cases where predominantly the crime scenes were dealt with correctly, and the exhibits found its way into an SAP-13, remained in an SAP-13 at the police station. It was never stolen or tampered with, and then submitted to the FSL. Whether it was a year later, I think for purposes of this exercise, it's irrelevant. The fact of the matter is it was not stolen at the police stations, and it arrived at the Forensic Science Laboratory intact.
The other issue with the entire drug bust at the Durban Harbour is the registration of the drugs as an exhibit. So I've been mentioning that this file is called an SAP-13, and that's because it is only done at police stations. In other words, this Hawks office, which is not a police station, was never supposed to keep the drugs in the first place.
No, it's expected of police officers entering exhibits into the SAP-13 to be specific and complete. It means that exhibit seal numbers must, for instance, be entered. If there's a serial number on exhibits, that needs to be entered. If it's cash that's being handed in, the serial numbers of the cash need to be entered. So it needs to be a very comprehensive and complete entry that's being made there.
And if we then take it to the second, what I'll call the second SAP-13 register, which is the receiving police station, must the same exercise be undertaken?
That is correct, Commissioners. That's when exhibits are transferred to another station.
So in the absence of an approval such as contemplated in sub 1, Port Shepstone DPCI offices cannot retain a sub 13 register.
That's correct. That's correct, Commissioners.
To your knowledge, have the offices, and that's the Port Shepstone offices, ever been approved to retain such a register?
I do not have knowledge of that, Commissioners.
It was also revealed that all those involved in the handling of the drug seizure were subjected to a polygraph test. But get this did not include KZN Hawkshead Lesetja Sinona, who, as you'll know and as I've already mentioned, had the keys to the Port Shepstone office where the cocaine was being kept.
The facts here are that General Sinona was involved in the decision to take the drugs, the cocaine, to Port Shepstone, and in the end, he kept the key. I'm just trying to establish in my own mind whether he ought not to have been subjected to a polygraph test. I'm asking this in the context of the fact that there were polygraph tests here. And I assume that everybody who was involved in all of this saga was subjected to such tests, but he was not. Ought he have been subjected to the test, in your view?
In my opinion, Commissioner, indeed, he was supposed to be exposed to the process, as he played an active role in the Port Shepstone matter. It's not as if he was just the provincial head sitting at the distance. He was privy to the activities. He visited the Port Shepstone offices shortly after the seizure and took possession of the key. That's active participation. It's not as if he was at the distance and that he was not related to this matter. So.
Okay, so no lie detector for Sinona, and this is the note that Flynn concluded his testimony on Wednesday. But the next day, I can tell you, the issues around the security defects of the Hawks Port Shepstone office remained a central theme. It was then time for retired Lieutenant Colonel Jacobus Prinsloo to take the witness stand. Now, Prinsloo corroborated previous testimony that the facility had experienced 7 previous break-ins, including one in October 2021, and as you heard earlier, it was just weeks before those drugs were stolen.
There was no cameras or beams outside the office. Further, there was no alarm system monitoring movement on the outside or exterior of the building. Turning to the inside, there was a reception area which was not manned due to the limited staff that we had. At the ground floor and first floor were offices. The 2 walk-in safes, strong rooms, were on the ground floor. The safe was not accessible from the outside of the building. There were no cameras inside the building. However, there was an alarm system which I think there's a typing error there. Which monitored motion. No, that's correct. When it was armed, it would be triggered by motion, but only in the passages. None of the officers had any, I forgot the word now of that. The sensors, none of them had a sensor in it. All staff had their own unique code to activate and disarm the alarm. The alarm would not work if there was no electricity, even if it had been armed. Once there is no electricity, it gets disarmed and not work. Further, even if it got triggered and made a noise, no one would know, as the office would be closed and the nearby businesses would also be closed. Basically, the alarm would just ring until someone comes in the following working day. If it went off on Saturday, for example, and assuming there was no interruption of electricity supply, it would be deactivated or disarmed by the first person at the office on Monday morning. If there was interruption of the electricity supply on a Saturday, for example, the alarm would be disarmed and the office would be totally exposed. Obviously, this was a serious risk of exposure.
Prinsloo took the Commission through several photos of what this Hawks office actually looks like and the buildings that surrounded it, and basically whether or not it was a suitable place to store such an important consignment. It turns out that other offices next door had 24-hour security, except this one, which was a crucial storage site.
You say currently there's 24-hour patrol. Currently.
They've got 24-hour security guards there.
Where, the TPCI office?
No, those Department of Human Settlement.
Okay, so the TPCI office, does it have any security?
It's got nothing.
As we speak?
It's got nothing.
To date?
To date. The alarm doesn't even work anymore.
Okay.
Maybe an earlier question then. When did you retire?
I retired at the end of May 2025, Commissioner. It's a year ago.
Okay, and you are able to say, as at today, they still don't have security in the alarm?
I was there Monday and Tuesday to get documents for this commission, and I did speak to them.
But Prinsloo was pressed on a previous instance in 2018 when drugs were stored at that office and when 24-hour security was provided. The retired unit commander told the inquiry that unlike the consignments from the Durban harbour, the example provided for narcotics seized were within Port Shepstone, and so it followed that they were at this building. He also basically distanced himself as the custodian of the half a ton of cocaine by virtue of him not being the one who kept the keys to the safe.
I think in your statement that at some point when high-value exhibits were stored there, an arrangement was made for 24-hour security, I think in the form of guards, warm bodies. Am I correct?
That is correct, Commissioner. That happened in June 2018. We stored a lot.
So 2 years, exactly 2 years before the cocaine was brought.
That's correct.
Yes. Whose responsibility was it to arrange that 24-hour security?
I did that at that stage, Commissioner.
Why was that so? Were those Port Shepstone exhibits? I want to understand why you made the arrangement.
It was a Port Shepstone case. It was our own case.
Yes.
It was a drug lab that we took down, 2 million Mandrax tablets. We guarded it there itself for 2 days until it was taken to FSL in Pretoria.
Stay with us, because after the break, Prinsloo basically told the commissioners that he believes the theft of the cocaine was an inside job. He unpacks who he thinks was involved. More on that in a moment. We're at the tail end of this week's Madlanga WRAP, but let's stay with Prince Louis' testimony because he details just how vulnerable the Hawks Potchefstroom officers were. It turns out the premises were previously and had 24-hour security guarding it, but the contract for the company doing this expired. And to make matters worse, there is email evidence where officers, including one Captain Lisa Fanigag, consistently requested the renewal of that expired security contract, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The monthly cost of these protective measures, a mere 593 rands.
I just do not understand why a contract for only 593 rand 56 cents could not have been maintained. I'm not directing that to you. I guess I'm directing it to the entire system. There's so much wasted of government funds and funds used for corruption and all sorts of things. But with that in mind, you find a contract of this negligible amount, bearing in mind government resources not being maintained. It just boggles the mind.
In fact, senior KZN Hawks officials, and to be specific, its head, Lesetja Senona, and Prince Louis' boss, Brigadier Campbell Newzroom, ignored a 2017 decision that exhibits such as drugs would no longer be stored at their provincial facilities. And as you'll well know by now, this office had previously experienced 7 break-ins, including the one weeks before the November burglary, where those drugs vanished into thin air.
When the 11 October 2021 break-in happens, you know that you've got a consignment of cocaine in this building, because the earlier break-ins, you had nothing substantial in there. But the 11 October 2021 break-in happens, you are responsible for the building, because you are the boss there. The consignment does not belong to you. You say it's a Durban case, it's not your case. What steps did you take to say to these people, I can't keep your stuff here because it's clearly not safe? There has been an attempt to break in. I don't know if the people who tried to break in wanted to steal this cocaine. There's something valuable here, and I no longer believe that it's safe to keep it here. So before we get to issues of lawful instructions from superiors, you are responsible for this building, and there's an attempted break-in, and you know that you have exhibits that are worth at least 200 million. What steps do you take to increase the security, or to say, I can't keep this thing here, it's not safe in my office?
Commissioners, I reported to Brigadier Newzroom. He asked me for progress report, for factual report on the break-in. Everything was provided to them at the provincial office. We had instructions from General Senona not to inform other members about what we housed in there, that the drugs was there. So we were given instructions by him that the members must visit the office. So with that instruction, and I'm not allowed to tell the members what is in there, I just asked him to, after hours, to make a turn at the office, just make sure everything is safe there.
But you didn't say, either we increase security or you take your consignment because it's not safe in my office. You did not do that.
I did not do that, Commissioner.
The Madlanga Commission has also been told that the National Office of the Hawks, I should say, including its top general, Godfrey Libya, were fully aware of the security issues of the Port Shepstone office. This also includes, as I've mentioned, Sinona and Brigadier Campbell Newzroom.
The national head was also well aware of the security challenges at my office. As I explained with the provincial inspections that we have every quarter, we have once a year, we have inspection from the national team. Where the national head sends people, it's normally a brigadier and some full colonels that visit these units and inspect everything, dockets, registers, everything. And they also interview the commanders. And I have raised it with them. And those reports from those national inspections goes directly to the national head. So the national head was well aware of my challenges there in Port Shepstone. If I would have jumped Brigadier Newzroom and General Sinona and communicated with the national head, even from the national head side, I would have been in big problems.
Here's how Procedural explains what happened on the day they discovered that there was a break-in at their offices.
It was about 10 to 7. Warrant Officer B.J. Pinar phoned me and said we had a big problem and I must come down to his office. As I was starting to walk down the steps, I could smell a peculiar smell, which you normally have when metal has been grinded open with a metal or steel grinder. When I got down, I saw that the office was, Pinar's office was trashed. I also noticed that the safe door was standing halfway open and the blue chair, which was inside the safe, was standing outside in the passage, and that both locks were grinded off. The passage was covered in dark, powdery substance. I walked to the safe and saw that all the exhibits was taken.
Well, that's it from me for this week's edition of the Madlanga WRAP. But stay tuned to Channel 405 for all the proceedings of the inquiry. I'll be back at the Bridget Mabanda Justice College next week. But for now, it's goodbye. Thank you for watching.